So friends, welcome to another edition of Justice Matters One-on-One. I am thrilled today to be talking again with my friend Bob Westbrooks. Last time we spoke, it was back in late 2023. It was as we were recovering from the COVID pandemic. Bob was the executive director of what was called the PRAC, the Pandemic Response Accountability Committee. But really more importantly for today's chat with Bob, Bob was a longtime Inspector General. And as you well know, Inspectors General are in the news. You know, I often refer to Inspectors General as the shepherds of good government, honest government, ethical government, because they are the watchdogs who keep an eye on the executive branch and the executive branch agencies to try to prevent, to try to investigate, to try to uncover what? Fraud, waste, abuse, corruption inside government. And as you undoubtedly know, one of Donald Trump's first acts after being sworn in as president was to unlawfully fire, and we're going to get to that, 17 inspectors general. Why? Well, I think we can infer why, but we're going to be talking about that. As I mentioned last time I was here with Bob, we were talking about his book, Left Holding the Bag, a watchdog's account of how Washington fumbled its COVID test. And you can probably guess who was left holding the bag. It was we the people, the American people. And I'll tell you, this is still timely reading, particularly because of the IG crisis that we're going through, courtesy of Donald Trump's unlawful firings of the inspectors general. So I still urge you to pick up the book, and I will put a link to where you can purchase the book in the description of this video. But let me welcome Bob here. It's so great to see you again, my friend.
Great to see you.
I know you're recently back from Ukraine, where you're doing some work on behalf of our country, but with the government over there, trying to guard against corruption, fraud, waste, abuse. And we may touch on that a little bit, but if you can start by telling our viewers a little bit about your background and particularly your work as an Inspector General.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here. I started my career as an agent. I was a U.S. Postal Inspector, was a lawyer before that, but I was a postal inspector, and it was one of the best jobs in government and really working on behalf of the American people. And you look at like the mail theft crisis that's out there now, and our checks are getting stolen at record levels right now, and the postal inspectors are the ones that are on watch. I did that for several years, and I migrated to the Inspector General community.
So tell the folks a little bit about, let's just pause there.
Yeah.
What is an Inspector General? What do you all do?
Inspector General is an independent watchdog. You are the eyes and ears in an agency for the American people, period. You transcend elections and political cycles and political parties. Your job is to be the eyes and ears and have the institutional knowledge. The fun part of the job that people sometimes think about is the investigative side of running around, just like the FBI or any other law enforcement agency, and working cases, working fraud cases, working in corruption cases. But there's another important part of the job too, which is the audit function, which people don't really think about. And what's unique, and we're the only country that has a system quite like this, where we've got pretty much for every agency or department, there's an IG. There's like 75 plus around government, all the major departments. And you are independent from management and leadership of that department. You report to, in theory, to Congress and the American people. And your job is to know what's going on in that agency. Your job is to know, for example, if you've got outsiders that are breaching your IT system without authority, that's your job. And so people don't realize that there's an IT security mission, there's a financial management element to the job, there is the corruption, there's performance auditing. All of these functions roll into one.
So Bob, you just said one of the duties of inspectors general is to make sure there aren't outside breaches of computer systems, security systems, that sort of thing. I wonder how many of the viewers sort of thought of what we are experiencing right now, not necessarily outside, but we've got Elon Musk and his team of young interns who are apparently accessing our computer systems, our private, sensitive, personal identification information and all. Would those kind of things, if they were happening, be within the purview of inspectors general?
1,000%. That's exactly what we do on the IT security front. And we've got a lot of contract auditors that help us in this front. But there's a large body of law that protects our federal IT systems. And for good reason, right? They're privacy related. There are certain things that agencies have to do before they can even connect with a system and go online and start collecting data or using data. And one of an IG's core function is in the IT security space, along with the Government Accountability Office, and to make sure that the rules are being followed. The rules are there for a reason. The rules are there to prevent bad things from happening with data, both maliciously and negligently, right? It's the same thing. You've got these, apparently, in the news is reporting, a group of relatively young engineers or programmers that don't know the federal system. They might be whiz kids at programming languages, but some of these computer systems are really dated legacy IT systems, and I doubt they have the programming skills in COBOL or Fortran or whatever. And so, but it's the IGs that are on watch with these systems to make sure that data is protected.
They should be on watch unless they were unlawfully terminated in what some have called a Friday night massacre by Donald Trump. Specifically, Friday, January 24th, he came in and he summarily canned 17 inspectors general. What was your first impression? What was your first thought when you heard that reporting?
Well, shock was the first thing, even though I wasn't necessarily surprised because it had been talked about. It was alluded to in Project 2025. I was just stunned at the scale of it. And then immediately that shock turned to anger. And anger on behalf of the American people, quite honestly, because now I know every one of these IGs that were fired, they're good people, but it's not about individuals that lost their job. It's really about the role and the function. And when you decapitate the head of these offices, that at some level has an effect on the work that's being done, right? On the organization and the path forward on the work. It has to. Now, the IGs and the IG community are putting up a brave face, and they're continuing forward with their oversight work. But it is a very disorienting step when the head of your office is taken out, and you don't know if the next person that's coming in line is going to be able to keep their job. So I was angry. I'm still angry about it. I think it's a horrible thing for the American people. And I just don't, I think because the IG community is by tradition and history tends to be very quiet and unassuming. And because there's a new scandal that happens or new news that's broken every single day, this is sort of last week's news, and it's unfortunate that it is because we absolutely need IGs on the watch.
I can tell you the first thing that I thought of when I heard that President Trump just summarily fired without cause and in violation of the law, which requires 30 days advance notice to Congress before you terminate an inspector general. We'll talk more about that in a minute. The very first thing that popped into my head was the Shakespeare line. First thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. Now, people sometimes receive that quote as, oh yeah, I hate lawyers. I'm a lawyer. I don't really care for lawyers, quite frankly. Yep. But it wasn't meant to convey, let's do something to the lawyers because they're cruddy people. It was because one of the first steps on the road to totalitarianism is getting rid of the lawyers, the people who will keep criminal or abusive or corrupt government officials in check, and the people, the lawyers, who will guard against folks who are persecuted or vindictively prosecuted by a corrupt government, a corrupt law enforcement agency, a corrupt Department of Justice at the insistence of the president. Is this starting to sound familiar? Mm-hmm. So I thought of the Shakespeare quote, first thing we do, let's kill all the lawyers. First thing we do, let's get rid of the internal watchdogs, the shepherds of good government, so they can't see what we are about to do inside these agencies, or if they can see it, maybe they will be chilled in investigating it, in reporting it, in aggressively going after it. So I was horrified. I, like you, remain angry because this is a degradation of our federal government, and it is working to the detriment of the American people.
Absolutely.
So we've said a couple of times, or maybe just I've said a couple of times, that this was unlawful. And first of all, you don't have to take it from me. You can take it from, one, the New York Times, if you are so inclined, because on January 27th, just 3 days after the Friday night massacre of 17 inspectors general, they said, the New York Times reported, quote, Trump broke the law in dismissing independent watchdogs. And also there was a letter that was written and forwarded to the White House from somebody that you know well, Hannibal Mike Ware, who is the chairperson of the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency. Talk to me about what it looks like the Mike Wares and the Inspectors General community as a whole is doing. How are they responding? Are they pushing back? Can they push back?
That's a great question. So you could go, there's a website, ignet.gov. That's the website of the IG community. And you go to the IG directory and you'd be shocked at the number of IG positions that say vacant right now or acting IG right now. We do not have a core group of permanent IGs in office. And that's what we need, particularly at a time of any transition in administrations. That's what you want. You want strong watchdogs. We don't have that now. A few IGs have gone out and have spoken out in the media. Mike Ware has talked a little bit. Mark Greenblatt was the former chairman of SIGI, the Council of IGs. He's been on a number of news shows talking about the unlawfulness. Now, what's unlawful about it? The letter and spirit of the law. Yes, 30 days notice to Congress, but also you give the grounds for the firing. And the spirit of that law was clearly, without question, that there should be some grounds for which you are firing the watchdog. And one thing that's universal among the IG community is everybody scratching their head. They're like, why these 17? Now, aside from the fact, to your point about, taking people out, it's like storming the castle and you take out the watchman first, right? Or kill the lawyers first. So some of the agencies, it's pretty clear, I think, why they wanted to take out the IG of Office of Personnel Management, or why they wanted to take out some of the other agencies, right? It's just USAID is still, ironically, still in office, but the agency itself is being shut down.
The watchdog has nothing to guard, apparently, if you shut down the entire agency.
Indeed, indeed. So the community as a whole is trying to figure out how they respond to it, how they maintain and stay true to their core mission of being nonpartisan and just doing the job on behalf of the American people of finding fraud. And that's really the struggle now. Is it's easy for the Doge to look at some spending data and say, look at this. We see some expenses to Politico. We see some subscriptions to Politico. It's obvious fraud and waste. I've been in the fraud and waste business my whole career. It's rare, if ever, that you can just look at data and draw a conclusion about fraud or waste. There's work that has to be done with that analysis. That has to be done. It's very satisfying to tell people it's waste and fraud, but there's usually a story behind it. And it's just preposterous that they would come in, get access to data systems, and be able to just immediately report out in the news that this is fraud and waste. It's just not plausible.
So let me touch on a little bit of this letter from Mike Ware, which he drafted and sent the same day. He sent to the White House the same day Trump fired these 17 inspectors general. And he said a couple of things that I want to quote. First of all, he notes that Donald Trump's explanation, or the White House's explanation, is, quote, due to changing priorities, your position as inspector general, was in the letter that went out to these IGs, is terminated effective immediately. Well, to this lawyer's mind, there are a couple of problems with that. First of all, as you said, they're supposed to give a reason under the letter and spirit of the law, and that is a substantive rationale, including detailed and case-specific reasons for the removal of the IG. So when the person firing the IG can only come up with, due to changing priorities, you're canned. That is what we call a statement of a party opponent that will be admissible in litigation for a wrongful termination if one is brought by these inspectors general. That's a little evidentiary problem. The second problem is, as Chairman Ware notes, the law, which for anybody scoring at home is the Inspector General Act of 1978, which can be found at 5 United States Code, Section 403B, the law requires 30 days advance notice to Congress if a president intends to terminate, fire an inspector general. Trump didn't do that either. And we're still in that 30-day period right now. So let me ask you, what do you think the remedies might be for these IGs that were plainly unlawfully terminated?
But, unfortunately, there's no remedy written in the law. It really depends upon Congress acting in good faith and enforcing the laws that they wrote. And that's what's a little maddening to me, is that Congress writes and passes these laws intending the executive to give a valid reason for the termination of an IG. But then when one president gets in power, they say, never mind, we really didn't mean that. We weren't serious about that requirement. And I think it's important for people to realize the history here on IGs. There was really, before the first administration with President Trump, there was a single IG that was fired in the history of IGs, and it was a bipartisan firing. It happened by President Obama. He sent notice. This was under an old law, but he sent notice to Congress, and he sent a private letter to both parties in detail explaining the reasons. There was good public policy reasons why it wasn't fully made aware to the American people of the underlying reasons. Sometimes you want to protect the privacy of people. Mm-hmm. And so in this instance, that is exactly what the president did, was send the notice to Congress and then privately sent, not privately, but sent a letter that was non-public to members of Congress to say, here are the more detailed reasons why it was justified in this particular instance. Of course, some people complained about it, but it was a very relatively transparent process. It was the only time in the history before, as I write about in the book, before first administration of President Trump, when he fired IGs for protecting whistleblowers, which is another thing that I didn't touch on, but that's a core function of IGs, is to provide a safe harbor for whistleblowers. Government, we should all want to encourage whistleblowers to come forward.
Define what a whistleblower is.
So a whistleblower is anybody that has personal information about alleged wrongdoing in an agency. They don't have to be right. Sometimes they're not right because they don't have the full picture, but many times they are. And I've yet to encounter, and I think this is one great flaw in our system of government, is we do not do a really good job protecting our whistleblowers under the law, because anybody that comes forward, it's an incredibly courageous thing to come forward, because they know the long history of whistleblowers, that they're going to pay a price for doing the right thing and telling somebody that something is amiss. Now, under the law, the IGs can provide confidentiality and anonymity to whistleblowers and can investigate if there's whistleblower retaliation, along with Office of Special Counsel. But we need a robust system to protect whistleblowers. It works for both sides. It doesn't matter what political party you're in. You want whistleblowers.
And, we've talked about this, and I'll just touch on it briefly. One of the things that I always thought would be valuable was actually amending our oath of office that we both took as federal government employees. I swear to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I used to remember the code section off the top of my head because it is a federal law. That oath is the product of a federal law, which can be amended. And I always thought, why don't we consider amending it to add one simple clause? And I will promptly report any instances of fraud, waste, or abuse, or of crime and corruption by federal government employees and officers of which I become aware. What does it do? It converts everybody into a potential whistleblower by their oath of office. Why shouldn't we require, by sworn oath, people to report corruption inside our federal government? Now, some will say, yeah, but people don't necessarily abide by their oath, and that's true. But I have a feeling if everybody took that oath and every government officer, employee, official knew that everyone around them might take their oath seriously and report corruption, maybe that would have a deterrent effect. But I do think, let me be honest, Bob, I don't think a renaissance of ethics in government is what we're going to accomplish in the next couple of years, but it doesn't mean we're not going to keep pushing for better government.
And on that point, ironically, the work that I'm doing in Ukraine is in the area they call it capacity building for their anti-corruption systems. And one of the things that not only the U.S. but the rest of the world has pushed for and advocated for is exactly what you just described in this ethically challenged culture that is really trying to right itself. In Ukraine, we're pushing them to say, no, you have an obligation to report corruption and wrongdoing. It's not just a thing where you're going to be protected if you do that, but you really, as a member of society, you've got an obligation to report that.
Yeah.
And it's ironic that we're pushing that overseas and we don't have that in our own country.
And if whistleblowers don't have an inspector general, to whom they can report the crime, the fraud, the waste, and the abuse, the corruption that they are seeing, then what hope do we have of really attacking corruption in government? Let me ask you this. As of right now, I don't believe we've seen any reporting of any inspectors general filing any kind of wrongful termination suit in court. I know there are some administrative procedures that sometimes you have to go through and exhaust before you file a lawsuit. Do you suspect we're going to see some of them fight back in court by filing wrongful termination suits? And then we'll take the next step about what happens if they lose, what happens if they win.
It wouldn't surprise me if a couple did. I think some of the 17 are looking at this in a more pure light and thinking that the president has the authority to do this. And even though it wasn't mechanically done in the right manner, that ultimately the end result will be the same. And in 30 days, with just a pretext of a reason, they could still be removed. So I don't know that there's a huge appetite for people wanting to pursue legal remedies when there might not be a real benefit to them at the end of the day, other than vindication that they were removed illegally. So, but I do think some will go forward with that. I hope they do, because I think Congress needs to be pushed on this. It's really the ball's in their court to enforce this provision of law. And maybe it will take, the judiciary and a court coming forward to say that this was wrong, that will hopefully prod Congress to maybe examine their own conduct.
And it feels a bit ironic that when, Donald Trump violates federal law by cutting Congress out of the loop, there was a 30-day advance notice requirement. Feels a bit ironic that the Republicans are in Congress, who in a sense are the victim of Donald Trump's violation of the federal law, are like, not a big deal.
Yeah.
What it seems to me they're doing is just laying down, giving up their power, giving up their authority, and conceding that, we are comfortable with governmental lawlessness. And to a rule of law guy his whole life, I can't wrap my mind around that.
Yeah. And the reality in the last, 10 years, 15 years, you've had IGs that have worked very closely with both parties in Congress on a variety of issues, safety issues, all across the board, aviation safety in our native lands, food safety, healthcare fraud, you name it, across the whole spectrum of government services. You've had IGs that have provided very valuable insight to members of Congress. It's a shame that now Congress doesn't realize the value of what they've been getting, having the eyes and ears inside these agencies.
Yeah. So now let's touch on this, because we've talked about the law, 30 days advance notice before you fire an IG, which Donald Trump violated, inarguably violated it. You have to give specific case-based reasons. What was this Inspector General's transgression that resulted in you having to terminate it, violated that part of the federal law? What people might not know is these federal laws have no teeth. There is no punishment. There is no sanction. It's basically a federal law on the books, but if you violate it, no harm, no foul. Does that conjure up any concerns, either IG specific concerns or general concerns about the vitality, the effectiveness of the rule of law?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, right? Because doing this work in Ukraine, I'm exposed to kind of the old legacy vestiges of the Soviet system. In the Soviet legislative system, there's a sanction for everything. And that's to the other extreme, right? So we have a system, and I think the magic of our system, a rule of law is checks and balances. And it's branches of government acting in good faith. And we would assume, wouldn't we not, that these branches would act in their own best interests, that the Congress would act in its own best interest to enforce the laws that it has been given and not lay down, because, yeah, they might have a president in power today that's in their political party, but next administration's not going to, there's no guarantee it's going to be that always that way, right? And so you have to enforce it equally under all circumstances. And it's the same with the courts. But so, I don't know that I'm necessarily in favor of all laws having teeth and remedies, because I do think that's how our system of government is built on checks and balances and enforcing those things that should be enforced, both the letter and the spirit of the law. And so I think it's shameful that Congress, on a number of fronts, hasn't been more proactive and strong to date. And maybe they'll find their spine here shortly, but maybe not.
It does seem like it relies on the goodwill and the honor of the men and women who populate the federal government to abide by the law, whether it has teeth or not, whether there's a sanction or not. And you use the term the magic of checks and balances. And I agree with you that when we are working well as a government and as a nation, it is the magic of checks and balances that helps us thrive. I hope the magic isn't disappearing, but I'm concerned. I want to finish with this, and this is really a thought experiment, but it's something that keeps me up at night. Donald Trump may come to a point in his presidency, and it may be very soon, because lots of lawsuits are being filed. A couple by organizations that are supporting FBI agents and employees that it looks like are on the eve of being wrongfully terminated. They are filing suit on behalf of federal prosecutors, assistant United States attorneys that have been told to resign or else, in what's been referred to as the fork in the road email. And that lawsuit actually covers all federal government employees, some 2 million, 2.1 million strong, all of whom receive the fork in the road email. I'm not so sure how, if all 2 million federal government employees hit resign, responded to that email, where that would leave us as a government and as a nation. But there may come a time very soon when Donald Trump has court rulings issued against him, has injunctions put in place by federal judges saying, no, the executive branch can't do this. And Donald Trump may flirt with the idea of saying, I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway because I am the all-powerful, ruler at this point, not just courtesy of the Supreme Court's absolute immunity ruling. Where does that leave us? One, it leaves us with a true constitutional crisis. But what does that conjure up for you if we actually have Donald Trump plunging us into that kind of a constitutional crisis where the executive branch does not recognize the authority of the judicial branch?
It's game over, right? I mean, I think it's the end of our democracy if that should come to pass. One of the things I'm optimistic about is you're seeing now with some of the litigation now and the court decisions that the administration and President Trump can say all he wants to, but he still has a number of people that work for him that have to implement these new policies. And at least through today, you get people that are honoring, temporary injunctions that are being issued by the court, and they're reconsidering positions and they're hitting pause. Yes, it's a frightening thought if that day comes where we don't have those guardrails in place. But one of the things we haven't touched on, but I think it's critical to mention, is just the dedication of public servants. Yeah, I'm a former watchdog, former IG, 30 years in government. I can tell you the vast majority of public servants that I worked with and on behalf of were good, honest people trying to do the right thing. Is government perfect? Absolutely not. There's a lot of waste. There's a lot of inefficiency. I wouldn't be in business if there wasn't. But these public servants, they're the ones on the front line now. And so I say to them, hold the line, because eventually the reinforcements will come, whether it's through the courts or hopefully someday enough in Congress will find their voice and their backbone. It's the public servants now that are bearing the brunt of this, in addition to the American people.
And let me give you the hallelujah chorus on that, because the men and women of the federal government, the Department of Justice that I worked with for decades, almost to a person, good, honest, honorable public servants doing the work of the American people. And here's the good news, and it's always nice to end on a little bit of good news. Yeah. The fork in the road memo that urged everybody to just, you better hit resign or else. The reporting is a very, very small fraction of the federal workforce has hit resign. Yeah. So they're holding fast, they're standing strong, they're not giving in to the threats, the intimidation, or the lawlessness. And I think, we should take comfort in that. Yep. I call them points of light. We should feed and support and prop up those points of light, because I do think we are in the Trump-induced darkness right now. But the points of light hopefully will gather strength, will help get us through this. And, we all, I think, have to do our part in whatever way we can. People hear this all the time, but, one of the things we can do early and often is call and email and text all of our elected representatives and let them know that this lawlessness is unacceptable. Whether you're in a blue state or a red state, it doesn't matter. Do it. Do it early and often, because pressure bursts pipes. Yes. And we want to exert as much pressure as we can.
And another thing, Glenn, corporations too, right? Corporate America now is getting pressured in just unconscionable ways. And I think it's important for us, we have a voice as consumers, to also reach out to corporations to give our support to them, because they're hearing from the dark voices right now and really changing dramatically a lot of their policies and practices now that's not helping the American people. So I totally agree that we need to reach out to members of Congress, but I think we also need to give support to corporate America as well.
Support those corporations, those businesses, those organizations that seem to care about the rule of law, that seem to care about, honest, ethical government. And keep an eye out for the ones that don't. And you know what? Spend your hard-earned dollars elsewhere. So yeah, if you're discriminating like that, people will notice. I appreciate you coming in and talking with me today. I really appreciate your body of work, your work as an inspector general, and hopefully we'll get together and talk again soon.
Sounds great.
All right, Bob.
All right, Glenn. Appreciate it.